What if the person you least expected was the one who could change your life forever? A humble housekeeper, a tycoon, and a toddler's first steps? Sometimes the most profound transformations come from the simplest moments. In the heart of a sleek, modern mansion, the air was thick with a weight of unspoken tension. The sun poured through large windows, casting long shadows over the minimalist living room. White walls, pale wood floors, and lush greenery from outside set a peaceful scene. But inside, there was anything but calm. Robert, a wealthy tycoon, stood frozen in the doorway, his dark suit stark against the light. His sharp features, usually filled with authority and confidence, were now masked by a rare vulnerability. His eyes followed the small figure of Miriam, the new housekeeper, as she crouched down in front of his toddler, gently holding both of the child's hands. With a quiet smile, Miriam guided the toddler's hesitant steps across the room. Her uniform, a neat navy ensemble, seemed to glow in the sunlight, contrasting against the cold, polished surroundings of the mansion. She wasn't just showing the child how to walk. In that moment, she was imparting something deeper, a kindness, a patience that Robert had long forgotten. The child's tentative steps were a metaphor for something greater, and Robert's heart tugged at the sight. He had dismissed Miriam at first, seeing her only as an unremarkable servant. To him, her role was clear. She was just another employee in his vast empire, another cog in the machine of his luxurious, albeit empty, life. Yet here she was, the person he had mocked, guiding his son with a tenderness he hadn't known existed. The room felt smaller now, not because of the decor, but because Robert's own sense of space, his own world of power and privilege, seemed to shrink with every careful step the toddler took. The housekeeper, whom Robert had belittled for her humble background and quiet demeanor, was now at the center of something far greater than any business deal he'd ever made. For a moment, Robert wasn't the master of the mansion. He was just a father, watching, stunned, as his son learned to walk. And the woman before him, who he had once mocked, was the one showing him the way. Robert had never been one to hide his opinions, especially when it came to those he considered beneath him. When Miriam had first arrived as the new housekeeper, he had sized her up with the same critical eye he applied to his business deals. She was unremarkable, nothing like the polished professionals he was accustomed to in his world of high society. Miriam, with her quiet confidence and humble nature, didn't even seem to belong in his world. He remembered the first conversation they had, shortly after she was hired. She had entered the grand dining room with a soft knock, ready to begin her work. Robert had been sitting at the table, going over papers, and when he looked up to see her standing in the doorway, he couldn't help but feel a momentary discomfort. She looked at him with calm, unwavering eyes, as though she had seen it all before. "Good morning, Mr. Robert," she had greeted him, her voice low but clear. "Morning," he responded, barely glancing up. "You must have some experience in this sort of work. Don't disappoint me." She nodded, without hesitation, her face neutral. "I'll do my best, sir." Robert chuckled under his breath, his mind already racing with thoughts of her background. A woman like her, he thought, how could she possibly have the skills required for such a grand house? She wasn't dressed in fine clothing, didn't speak with the polish of his social circle, and most importantly, she wasn't as eager to please as his other staff members. There was something different about Miriam, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but it unsettled him. As days passed, he couldn't help but mock her in the privacy of his own mind. Who does she think she is? A woman from that background, working in a mansion like this? It was the way she moved so gracefully, the way she paid attention to his son. Those were the things that irritated him. Miriam didn't fit the mold of a typical housekeeper. She didn't talk much, didn't try to ingratiate herself. Instead, she carried out her duties with quiet precision, always respectful but never overly subservient. One evening, Robert stood by the staircase, watching Miriam as she gently coaxed his son, who had been slow to walk, to take a few steps. He scoffed quietly to himself. What does she know about raising a child? She's just a housekeeper. But there was something in the way she held his child's hands, the way her face softened as she encouraged him, that caught Robert off guard. His mocking tone faltered. She didn't look at his son like a burden or an obligation. She looked at him with an open heart, full of patience and warmth. Robert couldn't understand it. Miriam, as usual, said nothing. She didn't need to. It wasn't about words, it was about actions. And Robert was beginning to realize, though begrudgingly, that perhaps the woman he had dismissed so quickly was something more than just a housekeeper. He stood there for a long moment, not sure what to do with the uneasy feelings stirring inside him. For the first time, he saw Miriam not as an employee, but as someone who might just be able to teach him something about himself. As days turned into weeks, the dynamic between Robert and Miriam continued to shift, though neither of them spoke of it directly. Robert's initial mockery of her had slowly transformed into something less tangible, a sense of discomfort, a recognition that she was no ordinary housekeeper. At first, Robert had dismissed Miriam's quiet presence, focusing instead on the demands of his work, the meetings that stretched long into the night, and the growing tension between him and his wife, Evelyn. The walls of his mansion, so carefully designed to reflect his wealth, had become barriers between him and his family. Evelyn spent more time away, retreating in her own world, and their son, still struggling with his speech and development, seemed a distant memory in Robert's busy life. Miriam, on the other hand, remained constant. She spoke little, and yet her actions spoke volumes. She was always there for the child, patient, kind, and always present. Robert found himself watching her from the corner of his eye, noticing the way she engaged with his son. It wasn't that she was overly affectionate, but there was a calmness in her that Robert couldn't deny. Her influence on the child was evident. The small things she did, the soft words she whispered, the way she guided him with her hands, these moments, though seemingly insignificant, were starting to resonate in Robert's mind. One evening, Robert sat in his study, alone, his work scattered across the desk. He couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to Miriam. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't desperate to please him. She didn't seem interested in his wealth, his power, or even his approval. For the first time in years, Robert realized how empty his life had become. He had spent so much time chasing success, accumulating wealth, and isolating himself in his own bubble of privilege, that he had lost sight of what really mattered. Meanwhile, Evelyn had withdrawn even further. Their marriage, once filled with the promise of success and endless possibilities, now seemed strained and hollow. She was no longer interested in the grand gestures he made, the dinners, the vacations, the material gifts. She had given up on him emotionally long ago. Miriam, however, had quietly begun to take on a new role in the house. She wasn't just the housekeeper anymore. She was becoming the emotional anchor. Her relationship with the child deepened, and Robert noticed the changes. The boy, once hesitant and unsure, was now showing more confidence. Every time Robert walked into a room and saw Miriam sitting with his son, teaching him to walk or guiding him through simple games, a pang of guilt would rise within him. The worst part, though, was that Miriam wasn't trying to change him. She wasn't forcing anything on him. She wasn't demanding respect or attention. She simply existed in her own quiet way, and it was this calmness, this lack of pretense, that seemed to reach Robert in ways nothing else had. One afternoon, as Robert watched from a distance, he saw Miriam kneeling on the floor, gently holding his son's tiny hands as he took a few steps. Her face was serene, her movements tender. The child's face lit up with joy. For a brief moment, Robert forgot about his wealth, his status, his superiority. All he saw was the pure, simple connection between Miriam and his son. Robert didn't want to admit it, but he felt something stir within him. It wasn't just admiration. It was a recognition that perhaps he had been wrong about Miriam all along. He had dismissed her for her background, for her humble status, for the simple life she led. But now, as he watched her with his son, he realized that she had something he had been missing for so long. Something he hadn't even known he needed. The ability to connect, to nurture, to love without strings attached. The more Robert observed, the more he found himself questioning everything he had believed about wealth, status, and what it meant to truly be rich. Miriam had something he didn't, a richness of spirit, a depth of character that no amount of money could buy. The tension in Robert's heart grew, but it wasn't the kind of tension that came from the weight of a business deal or a fight with his wife. It was something more personal, more profound, and as much as he tried to ignore it, he couldn't shake the feeling that the change he so desperately needed might come from the very person he had once mocked. It was a bright afternoon, the kind of day when the sun seemed to bathe everything in a golden glow, and Robert found himself standing at the threshold of the living room once again. This time, he wasn't just watching from the doorway. He was fully present, his gaze fixed on Miriam and his son. Miriam was kneeling on the floor, her warm smile radiating as she gently held the toddler's small hands. The child wobbled on his feet, unsteady at first, but there was an unmistakable trust in his eyes. With every hesitant step, Miriam's encouragement echoed in the stillness of the room. A simple yet powerful phrase, "You can do it." Robert stood there, unable to move. It wasn't just the joy of witnessing his son's first steps. It was the realization that this moment, so tender and pure, had been brought about by Miriam's quiet strength. Miriam had taught his son more than just how to walk. She had shown him the true meaning of patience, kindness, and unwavering belief. Robert's chest tightened as he observed the scene unfold. The child's eyes sparkled with excitement, a clear sign that his journey into the world had begun. But for Robert, it was a personal awakening. As his son took another shaky step forward, Robert felt something shift deep within him. The walls he had built around his emotions, around his family, were starting to crumble. Miriam, the woman he had mocked, had done what no amount of wealth or status could. She had connected him to the one thing he had long been missing, true human connection. It was in that moment that Robert knew everything had changed. Robert couldn't remember how long he had stood there, watching, as his son took those first few steps toward Miriam. The realization hit him with the force of a revelation. All the wealth, all the success he had chased over the years, had never given him what this single, quiet moment had brought. The sense of warmth, of genuine connection, of human transformation. Miriam hadn't just helped his son walk. She had helped him rediscover the very essence of what mattered in life. The days that followed were different. Robert found himself thinking more, questioning his own choices. Evelyn, too, noticed the shift. At first, she was skeptical. Robert had always been so consumed by his work, so emotionally distant. But as Robert began to spend more time at home, as he started to reconnect with their son, Evelyn couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The walls between them, while still present, had begun to soften. One evening, Robert sat down with Miriam, a rare gesture. He had never before asked a housekeeper to sit with him, but today was different. "Miriam," he began, his voice unsteady, "I was wrong about you. You've taught me something that no one else ever could. It's not about the money or the title or any of the things I've spent my life chasing. It's about people, about connection. You've shown me that." Miriam smiled softly, her eyes warm but not surprised. She had always known that her impact wasn't about recognition. It was about doing what was right, what was needed. She didn't need his praise. All she needed was the satisfaction of knowing that, in her own way, she had made a difference. Over time, Robert grew more present, not just in his work, but in his family. He spent more time with his son, not just as a provider, but as a father. He started to see Miriam not as a servant, but as a mentor, someone who had taught him to walk in ways that went beyond just taking steps. The transformation was slow, but it was real. The mansion, once filled with the emptiness of wealth and solitude, now resonated with laughter, connection, and love. Robert had learned, in the most unexpected way, that the true riches in life weren't measured by assets or titles. They were found in the simple moments of kindness, compassion, and human connection. And Miriam had taught him that. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking tales. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes The most powerful transformations come from the simplest acts of kindness. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.